We look at a full updated list of the Baltimore Ravens 2024 NFL draft needs. All that and more coming up next during this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcoming to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, as always, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video, subscribe to the channel as well. Also in audio form, where you can follow along wherever you prefer to listen to your podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards with that. We're 5 days a week of Ravens content here, plus some bonus episodes as well, some live shows. We have all your Ravens coverage, news, analysis, updates, and so much more. So tell a friend, tell a family member. We have them covered here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. We are back here, and again, as we kind of talked about yesterday, crazy to think about how this draft is sneaking up on us. The first day of the draft comes up in just about 3 weeks. April 25th is when that'll happen. Obviously, now today is Tuesday, April 9th. So almost 2 weeks away, which is crazy to think about. We're going to be talking about a lot today and stuff we've talked about really throughout the course of the last couple of weeks, but a more formal episode on it today, which is an updated list of the Ravens' actual draft needs. So as we've talked about, things happen in free agency, positions get filled, some don't, needs pop up, guys get traded, guys get signed away. So we're going to be talking about just the updated list of Ravens draft needs. And it actually kind of slots in perfectly for an episode today, because we're going to talk about first the offensive side of the ball, two big needs there. Then we're going to move into the defensive side of the ball, talk about those big needs. We're going to rank them as well, where we're going to get into that. But then also in the final part of the show, get into some underrated needs that maybe people aren't necessarily thinking of right now, or it's just not at the top of people's minds. So there's lots to dive into. Let's dive into it. First one. Look, I think we have to start with the offensive line when it comes to the Ravens. That, to me, and we can just kind of rank it right now, honestly, Baltimore, to me, we can talk about edge and talk about corner or talk about wide receiver, all those positions. Spoilers, what we're going to be talking about today in the first couple segments, but you can't ignore the need on the offensive line. And I think the good thing about that for Baltimore, obviously you're down 3 starters right now. If you're the Ravens, John Simpson, Morgan Moses both go to the Jets, and then Kevin Zeitler to Detroit. It's a good year to need an offensive lineman. It's something we've talked about a lot. We're Baltimore right now picking at 30. Usually in that spot, it's kind of a weird spot, and it always is, where you don't really know who's going to be available then, or guys going to fall to that point. Look, they're not going to get a Kyle Hamilton type player there where they were at 14 and somehow by whatever, so the grace was looking down on them, apparently, the football gods. Kyle Hamilton fell to them. That's not going to happen this time around, but there is a possibility that there is a talented player that does fall to 30. And in a draft class where there are probably 7 or 8, specifically tackles, offensive tackle prospects that Baltimore could give first-round grades to, and I think a lot of teams are giving first-round grades to. In other draft classes, some of those guys that are going to fall to maybe 28 or 30 or 31, those guys would maybe go in the late teens or the early 20s in a different draft class. So that's why it's a good year to need an offensive lineman. Now, it doesn't mean Baltimore is absolutely locked in to taking an offensive lineman in the first round. There are other avenues they could go down, but you look at that line right now, and Tyler Linderbaum and Kevin Zeitler, John Simpson on the interior, you felt good about that, right? You felt good about it last year. Ronnie Stanley, Morgan Moses, you felt okay about that last year, especially as the year went on. I mean, I know Stanley had his ups and downs, so maybe you weren't feeling great about it. But not only for who's left, it's Linderbaum and Stanley. That's it. That's it. So to me, it's who do you trust? How much do the Ravens trust their guys? And who do they want to give a chance to? Because Ravens could easily go into camp and just say, you know what? We're just going to give our guys a chance. Ben Cleveland, Daniel Falele, Andrew Voorhees, Patrick McCary, Salah. They could just say, yeah, we're going to draft a guy in the mid rounds, but we're going to trust our guys. Now, that's not what I would personally do. I think you can easily find a plug and play tackle. And with Baltimore, whoever you have, and depending on how you have these guys ranked, I mean, personally, they're not going to probably get a guy like Furaga or Amarius Mims. Those guys aren't going to fall to them at 30, and I don't think they're necessarily going to go and trade up for a guy like that. Now, if they fall to a certain threshold, but I just don't think they are. But is that a Tyler Guyton for them at 30? Is that a Jordan Morgan for them at 30? What does that look like? And do they maybe want to kick that guy inside? Because John Harbaugh did say that they're going to give Daniel Falele a shot to win that starting right tackle job. Now, we're going to see how it ends up working out, but maybe there's not a tackle that they love at 30. And then all of a sudden you're kind of looking at, well, where else could they go there? This draft class is deep enough where even if they don't go tackle at 30 or offensive lineman at 30, they could easily pick a guy like a Patrick Paul in the second round. Maybe you go to Kingsley, one of those guys. There are, I think, throughout the entire class, throughout all 7 rounds, really quality prospects. But if I'm Baltimore, I think first 2 rounds, you got to take at least one offensive lineman. It's something that, again, you lose 3 starters. You have to fill it some way. And they do have guys on their depth chart right now who have been, they're going to get opportunities, and I think they should. But you also have to kind of look at the class that's in front of you and not devoid yourself of that talent. Now, the other one on offense is wide receiver. We talked about that yesterday with Rome Odunze in our mock draft Monday, where we did our trade up episode. So if you haven't checked that out, highly recommend that, because we talk about the possibility of them. Look, what if they go up and they get a guy for Lamar Jackson, get the guy for Lamar Jackson? Rome Odunze would certainly be that player for them. He fell to 17 in my mock draft simulator. I moved 4 picks for that 17th pick to go and get him. Now, a lot of people in the comments, and look, I get it, where it's, oh, why would you trade for a wide receiver in this class? Da-da-da. Well, Rome, first of all, is really good. He's just a really, really, really good player and fits what Baltimore needs. But you look at 30, I know a lot of people have their eye on like A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, some of those guys that, if you love Xavier Worthy, personally, I don't think he's necessarily a fit for what the Ravens need right now, but there's a possibility Worthy goes there as well. If you're a Xavier Legette fan, which I am, there are some options that maybe he goes in that 30 range. But wide receiver is still an option, even though Baltimore has invested a lot of draft capital in that position in the Lamar Jackson era. 2019, first-round pick on Marquise Brown. 2021, first-round pick on Rashad Bateman. 2023, first-round pick on Zay Flowers. So the conversation around that position is, are you going to spend 4 first-round draft picks in 6 years on a wide receiver? I mean, look, Marquise Brown isn't in Baltimore anymore. Obviously, he requested a trade because he didn't love the offense. Bateman, the jury's still out. I'm still a believer, but we have to see it. This is the put up or shut up year essentially for Rashad Bateman. Zay Flowers looks to be that dude. Looks to be a guy that has that wide receiver one potential, but they do need to draft a wide receiver this year, and especially if they don't sign a guy. It seems like they kind of have their mold for what they want. It feels like with the visits they've had in terms of the Josh Reynolds and the Michael Gallups of the world, but they need a bigger bodied player. And I have preached this on this show forever. So if you're an everyday, you're probably tired of me saying this, but they need a bigger bodied receiver, go up there, catch contested passes. That's kind of the skill set they need. They don't need the route runner, the shifty guy, the smaller guy. There are talented players in this class that are that, but there are also options like a Jalen Polk, for example, who's a Rome Odunze's teammate in the second round, that if they don't want to spend that first round draft pick on a wide receiver, they're still going to have options throughout the class. Obviously, again, Xavier Legette is a guy that I think is going to go. He's the perfect trade back candidate for them. They want to move back into the first couple picks of the second round. that's really where I think Leggette's going to go. And he's someone that I think fits the mold for the Ravens. So there are options offensively that the Ravens could go with their 30th pick. They could also move back with that pick as well. But I think when you're talking about needs, offensive line still tops it for me. I know it's not necessarily the most beautiful pick in the world, right? You take an offensive lineman in the first round, is like, oh, that's not quote unquote exciting, but it's necessary, right? It's necessary to invest in that position, especially when you're down 3 starters. But again, the good thing about this class is at the Ravens position of needs, it is a very deep class, and you can find guys in all 3 phases: early rounds, mid rounds, and late rounds. So that works in Baltimore's favor. And coming up, we'll be talking about some defensive needs for the team, specifically talking about the edge position, which we've been talking about a lot in the last week, and also cornerback. Stay tuned, a lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap, read a book, show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has so many different benefits, such as learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. That isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back to our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Taco Tuesday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here, talking Ravens football as, again, almost 2 weeks away, about 2.5 weeks from the draft. And we're going to be talking now about defense because, again, Baltimore's lost a lot of defensive. Well, they've lost talent on all sides of the ball. I mean, they've lost so many free agents there. They're going to get 4 comp picks next year, and there's not really a lot that can stop them, although I think the Ravens still are going to probably wait until after that comp pick deadline is kind of out of the way, where it's not going to count against that formula anymore. But they've lost so much, and I think we can kind of start with the edge position, which is something we've been talking about for a while, especially with the recent news of Baltimore's both now former and then some pass rushers who have returned. Jadeveon Clowney goes to Carolina, 2-year, $20 million deal, worth up to 24. Is, I've said before, Ravens were never going to be in on that price for him. It just the reality of their situation right now, that they were never going to be able to give up that money for Clowney. It's just not where they are. Now Van Noy comes back. Kyle Van Noy, that's the big one. I think a lot of people were freaking out about, oh, this is Van Noy going to leave too. What's the position going to look like with, before Van Noy, with Clowney gone, was it Afeowe, David Ajabo, Tavius Robinson, Malik Cam, and everybody's saying, well, all this inexperience. Well, Van Noy comes back. It's a 2-year, $9 million deal, so $4.5 per season. A lot more in the Ravens' wheelhouse right now in what they can work with, but that doesn't mean that they're done at the position. Van Noy is a big addition for him, big re-addition, I guess, right? He was by far and away the best veteran free agent at that position still left on the market. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden, all right, well, now Baltimore doesn't have to draft an edge rusher. Now, we did talk about this on Friday's show. We talked about how re-signing Kyle Van Noy does impact Baltimore's draft strategy. It felt like with each day that Van Noy wasn't re-signed and Clowney was already gone to Carolina, felt like it was really going to have to, it was a 2-horse race essentially between offensive line and edge because they really needed to draft someone. Now there's essentially, people call it somewhat of a big 4 with the edge position where, you have guys like Dallas Turner, who I think headlines this class, but there are 4 guys who are probably going to go in the first round when it comes to the edge guys. Chop Robinson is one that, local guy. A lot of people like him. I don't know if he even falls to 30 at this point. I think the Ravens will probably look more so towards a mid-round edge player. Not saying they can't draft an edge guy in the first round, especially if someone falls to them that they really like, but it just feels like you can, even like a mid-rounder guy, like a Jonah Ellis in the 4th round, for example. Maybe you draft a later round player like, I don't know. There are a bunch of them. I mean, we've talked about just on this show what type of player the Ravens could use there. they could draft a developmental player, but I also think something that's kind of getting lost in the shuffle is that they played Tavius Robinson a lot last year, especially through injuries, much more than I anticipated. I think they're going to use him in a much bigger role this year, regardless of who else gets brought in. But essentially what I think Baltimore's plan is they really wanted Afe Owe to step up next to Kyle Van Noy and almost take over Clowney's role in a way. And that's it's a big year for Ajabo and Owe, both those guys. You talk about Ajabo, someone who we've seen the potential, but the injuries have limited what we've seen from him. For Owe, he's been solid. I think Owe's been solid, but he hasn't had that full breakout season. We're obviously going to get some decisions on the fifth-year options as well for both Owe and Rashad Bateman. So we're going to have some conversations about that as well. But to me, it just feels like with Van Noy, the edge position, you can focus elsewhere, but not completely ignore it. Like, I don't think Baltimore should be ignoring the edge position right now, but I also think it can take a back seat while you kind of figure out the rest of what you want to do. And then if that is drafting a later round player and then going and trading for a Matt Judon from New England, or signing a Bud Dupree and trying to find essentially your next Kyle Van Noy or your next Jadeveon Clowney in free agency, somebody who is being written off. Because if we remember, Van Noy, Clowney, those guys, the question marks were, do they still have something left in their careers? Or they washed up? Or they has-beens? And obviously they revitalized their career in Baltimore. So are they looking for that? There are options. I mean, I could see Baltimore taking Chop Robinson at 30. I mean, they're not going to be in that Dallas Turner range, but if it's not those four, there's not a guy worth taking in the first round to me. And honestly, there might not be a guy worth taking until the beginning of day 3. Like, it's just, that's what it comes down to. So I think the Van Noy signing, and it's for better. It's for better. It did change Baltimore's draft strategy a little bit, I think, when it comes to edge, because you can focus elsewhere. And one of those positions you can focus at potentially is a cornerback. And a lot of people are saying, what do you mean? There's Marlon Humphrey still. Brandon Stevens balled out last year. They re-signed Arthur Millette, this, that, and the other. I agree. Corner right now is an interesting position, but we also have to look at what the position is, because the draft and building a team and trying to maintain success, it's not only about the next year, obviously. It ends up also being about what is the future of the position. And in reality, Marlon Humphrey's contract right now, over the next couple of years, we're going to see kind of what Baltimore's decision is with that, but they're going to have to re-sign him or let him go. Brandon Stevens, he's a free agent. He's not signed to an extension in a while. I've been pounding the table all off season for, the Ravens going out there and getting Brandon Stevens under contract. We could easily see him take the path of Justin Madubuike and some of these other guys who have bet on themselves. And look, based off of what his teammates did, like Madubuike, like Patrick Queen, etc., I wouldn't blame him if he bet on himself. Where Baltimore, I'm sure at some point either has or will approach him for an early extension. They love doing that with their guys. We saw it with Project Washington last offseason, where he signed that 3-year deal right around $17 million. I think the Ravens approached Madubuike, and it's kind of said that, yeah, Madubuike ended up betting on himself, and whatever deal he would have gotten, he essentially probably tripled or quadrupled that deal. So if Stevens sees that, then all of a sudden it's all right. Well, there is some uncertainty at the corner position. Ronald Darby also, I think, when you talk about the corner position, you also have to split it up into 2 different categories, which is inside corners and outside corners. Now, a lot of different players can play both inside and outside these days. It's just the versatility of the league and what ends up needing to be needed essentially out of your guys. But Darby was a really good third corner for them. And if they want to replenish that in the draft, there are options. I mean, in the first round, they're not going to be in like Mitchell territory or Arnold territory. But if Kool-Aid McKinstry is there, that's an option in the first round. But to me, the sweet spot of corners is more in the 2nd to 4th rounds. Kyrie Jackson is one of my favorite guys in this class. I mean, it's those different types of players. And I think Baltimore, essentially, if they keep around 9 picks, I think they could definitely double dip at that position as well. So maybe there's a 2nd round corner and then a 5th or a 6th round corner they like, or a 7th round corner. So Corner is going to be a position that's going to be interesting for them, but I do think, and again, they could sign a vet like Stephon Gilmore's out there. They could try to go that Darby route again, but I do expect them to draft corners because it would be awesome if we knew who Jalen Armour-Davis was, or we knew who Pepe Williams was at this point in their careers, but we don't, and that kind of clouds things up a little bit. So I think to me, definitely out of the big four I mentioned, offensive line is definitely number one. It's kind of a toss-up between wide receiver and corner right now. I think he could go either way, but I guess just for the sake of putting it there, I think I'll go corner with the slight edge, then wide receiver, and then edge number 4. We're coming up, we'll be talking about some underrated needs, some needs that Baltimore doesn't necessarily aren't at the top of their list, but we could still see the Ravens draft in a couple weeks. Stay tuned. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. There have been plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences for me, especially for MLB games. Sometimes I wasn't really sure if the seats were good. Sometimes I couldn't find last-minute tickets, and other times there were just no good deals at all. But Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, using your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Now, the Gametime app, there are a lot of different events coming up on there. Obviously, with the Orioles, I'm a big baseball fan personally. And so with the Orioles, I'm definitely checking out Gametime for all their deals, plus other big-time events, concerts in the Baltimore area as well. Obviously, the Orioles are going to have a lot of home games this year, a lot of exciting series. So I'm going to be looking at Gametime for that. Plus, the Gametime app has a ton of features. You get last-minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views. And the seat views are my favorite part because you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you actually buy your ticket. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Taco Tuesday. Really appreciate everybody for being here with me, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Again, we're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So that means in video form, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. In audio form, you can follow along wherever you get your podcasts on your favorite podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's the same show, both audio and video. So if you do want to listen one day, watch another day, you can do that because you're not missing out on any content. We do live streams after every piece of Ravens big news. You can turn notifications on for those. Also, we live stream after every single Ravens game. And of course, we'll be doing a bunch of bonus content throughout the draft. We'll be going live after each day of the draft. And also we'll have bonus episodes throughout the weekend as well. So really exciting stuff. The draft, it's one of my favorite seasons. It's also the busiest season for me. So it'll be exciting, though. Baltimore has 9 picks and talked about those big needs, the updated big needs for the Ravens in the first couple of segments there. But just because there are big needs does not mean there are not small ones. The Ravens do have a couple that are probably in the back of the minds of a lot of people, but we'll talk about them here in the final part of the show. The first one, and this one might be controversial, but it's okay. Running back, I think, is still a quote-unquote need for the Ravens. Now, this is not a pick, or I guess this is not a position I would use a pick on in the first 3 rounds. I've been very clear about that. The earliest I'm considering taking a running back for the Ravens in this class is 4th round and above, 4th round and later. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that I don't really like this class a ton in terms of early round talent. I think that you can find some really solid options later in this draft. And I think Baltimore, there are just other needs that they have to get squared away first. And you sign Derrick Henry. So if you're taking a running back in the 2nd round after already signing Derrick Henry to an $8 million per year deal, I think to me that's a mismanagement of assets. Now, Blake Corum, again, it goes for any of these backs, right? Blake Corum to me, I think, is a really solid back, but I'm not taking him anywhere until the 4th round or later than that. I think that it's easier to take a guy like an Amani Bailey, Kamani Vidal, one of those 6th, 7th round players, Isaac Guerendo, for example, and have him be your 3rd running back if you're Baltimore for the first however many games of the season until Keaton Mitchell comes back. And then after that, you can just slot your pick in the 4th running back spot. Keaton comes back and it's kind of a seamless transition. I think it's a little harder to do that with a higher up draft pick, but that's what would have had to happen. That's what would have to happen in that situation. So running back is still, it's still a need. And plus, Derrick Henry isn't necessarily a long-term solution for the Ravens at running back. Now, we're going to see how they end up maneuvering through that. But you still have Keaton Mitchell, who I think is probably the future of your backfield if he comes back healthy and everything, which, again, I'm knocking on wood he does there. But you have Justice Hill and Derrick Henry. It's a really solid, when healthy, 3 running back rotation. But I would still expect Baltimore to use a later round pick on a running back. Plus, they have 9 picks. So we're going to see how they try to will they move up in the draft? Would they trade a couple of those late round picks to move up? We're going to see there as well. Now, the one that I don't think Baltimore is going to take, there's like no shot personally they take. I don't think a tight end's in play this year. They have Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. They're probably going to sign a couple undrafted guys. I think tight end is out of the equation. But you move to the last position, essentially, not named fullback. And I do not expect, even though Ben Mason's now gone to the Chargers, do not expect them to use a pick on a fullback. But quarterback, actually, I would not be surprised if Baltimore did use a pick on a quarterback, like a Joe Milton, for example, out of Tennessee. We do not know who the backup to Lamar Jackson is going to be long-term. Malik Cunningham is really fun to think about. I think there's a shot he wins that, and then, look, he proves enough. I'm not counting out Cunningham whatsoever. We just don't know. Josh Johnson is not a long-term option, and he currently is the backup to Lamar. So the Ravens could take a guy in this draft late. It's not going to be early, not going to even be in the middle rounds. It would have to be late, probably with one of their 7th-round picks right now. But it's kind of an underrated need that no one's really talking about. But Tyler Huntley goes to the Browns, which I still don't get personally. But, Huntley goes to the Browns. We're going to see. But I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore uses a late pick on a quarterback. Defensive line is not a need for them, but they do like taking defensive linemen. And if a guy falls, I wouldn't be totally shocked if they use a pick on one, especially maybe after they square away on a lot of their needs or square away a lot of their needs. So defensive line is one where we know that Brent Urban is not a long-term solution. We know Michael Pierce is not a long-term solution. You do have, in my opinion, 2.5 long-term solutions. I think Matabika, obviously, we know he's going to be there for a long time. Travis Jones, I think, is going to be a mainstay for a long time. Broderick Washington is, in the second year since he signed that deal, we're going to see with him. But yeah, 3 young pieces, 2 veterans. I still think Baltimore could add, and when a Pierce retires, when an Urban retires, you can slot that guy in. So it wouldn't shock me there. I think inside linebacker, again, it's not a need. Even though Patrick Queen goes, you do still have Roquan Smith. Trenton Simpson was drafted for this reason. You maybe draft a special teams guy late, but I wouldn't necessarily anticipate them taking one. And then safety is the one where it's interesting because I do think the more I think about it, the more I love Ardarius Washington in that Geno Stone role for next year. And the reason we're drafting a safety would be, well, they just need some depth there considering they lost Geno Stone. So I wouldn't be shocked in the middle rounds if they took a safety, maybe someone with some potential slot versatility, but wouldn't terribly shock me if they took a safety. So we talk about the big needs all the time, but they're not just going to take, they have 9 picks. They're not going to take 2 offensive linemen or 3 offensive linemen, 2 corners and 2 edge guys and 2 wide receivers. They are going to also sprinkle in some of those lesser needs as well, some underrated needs. And so it wouldn't shock me if we see a couple of the ones I just listed out be taken, maybe even a little earlier than anticipated. But obviously, first of all, if you're Baltimore, you got to square away the big needs. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody for tuning into the show. Once again, be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form. We're bringing you 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens content and coverage. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content coming your way. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.